But you have not come to conclude that if it goes down, the current goes down, do the hemorrhages or these manifestation increase?
No, most of the patients we had during that epidemic, most of the patients we studied had platelet count between 60,000 to 80,000. Mainly because that was an epidemic, the patients presented early and...
You never followed up the patients?
No, we followed up the patients after 6 weeks.
What happened to the platelet?
The hemorrhages appear resolved.
I'm asking platelet.
Yes, they became normal.
From 60 days and back?
Yes, normal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nivedita. We have our next paper, Systemic Association in UVAGs in the Era of Newer Diagnostic in a Tertiary Care Hospital in India. Dr. Himobindu Adusumalli. She is absent. Okay, next is best paper from Karnataka Ophthalmological Society, Dr. M. Joshi, overall best paper award. The presenting author is Dr. Sushant Chofekar. Topic is DCR made simple by using unconventional tools.
No financial gains. Every surgeon faces three problems during DCR. One is bone cutting, second is intraoperative bleeding, third is failure of DCR. These are the instruments regularly used for DCR purpose, which we will not be using this. This is a new tool for DCR. This instrument is commonly known as rechargeable screwdriver or a drill. It's small, it has a slow speed machine, it has a high torque. It has an hexagonal magnetic socket for easy change of drill bits. But the drill bits have to be modified a little. This is the standard drill bit which will be given with the drill. This is the modified drill bit number 1. A metal sleeve has been inserted onto the drill bit to prevent deep penetration. Ready? Drill the pilot hole. This is the modified drill bit number 2. This is the exploded view. It has a core, a cutting sleeve, and a guard. The core has got a pointer and a hex for easily fixation. The size of the cutting sleeve is calculated with this. This is the assembled view of drill bit 2. Drill is now ready for the main hole. After you have taken the incision and reached the nasal bone, this is the area of cleared nasal bone. Make sure that the cleared nasal bone area has no loose tissue, muscle tags. If they are present, clear those. While filling the pilot hole is complete now. Lignocaine is injected in the nasal mucosa through the pilot hole to prevent patient discomfort. This is while filling the main hole. Halfway through the main hole, you can see a ring. Completed course. The time taken is less than 3 minutes. This is the piece of bone button to remove. Now, the nasal mucosa is cut off completely. The nasal mucosa is a piece. At this point, it may bleed. So, a balloon tamponade has been designed. This is the inflated balloon. And this is how it is made by using a glove, silicone tube, and a plastic syringe. This is how it works. Inflated balloon tamponade in place, which arrests the bleeding immediately. Now, sac is open as shown in the figure. Flap is fully open. Sac flap is stitched to the periosteum. And this is how the lateral sac is open. It is while suturing into the periosteum. The operation is completed by suturing the skin. This is the almost foolproof method of DCR since Closure of nasal mucosal flap is the most common cause of DCR failure. No nasal mucosal flap, no failure of DCR. The short video cutting the nasal mucosal hole. Friends, DCR shaker and stirred. Thank you.
What is the size of the opening you made in the bowl? What is the size of the opening you are making in the bowl?
10 millimeters.
10 millimeter by the drill.
Yes, sir.
So you are making a hole by the drill the center, suppose. Now how you have straightened the hole?
No. You're talking about the main hole or the
Yeah, main hole.
The main hole is 10 millimeters.
10 millimeter. So you may be opening in the center by the drill. Then how you enlarge it? The drill is not the size of 10 millimeter, what we can see from here.
No, sir.
What is
The
the
second drill, you change the drill.
Yeah.
The second drill, which you put, the second drill has got a core in the center.
Okay.
Okay, the core has got a pointer which fixes the bigger rim, cutting rim.
Okay.
And then the whole thing.
So when you are drilling, what are the chances of damaging the nasal mucosa behind the hole?
So that's why the
Because you are blind, almost you are blind. When you are drilling, you are not blind. Because once you have made an opening, your drill is already entered inside the opening, then you are enlarging it, so chances of damage of nasal mucosa, how much you have?
So the guard has been designed not for that deep penetration. So you can access the guard so that you can go 3 millimeters or 4 millimeters and not more than that.
And what is the follow-up period?
Follow-up, we call the patient after 8 days and the sac syringing has been done. And if it's not clear, then try to find out the reason why it is not clear. One case, I drilled the hole and the bone was very thin. So the drill went off through and through. And I thought the nasal mucosa is also cut. But in fact, the nasal mucosa is strong. So when I took out the drill, the nasal mucosa, I couldn't see it. So I just switched the sac. And within 8 days, the nasal mucosa closed. So that was a failure of DCR. So again, I had to reopen it and cut off the nasal mucosa.
What is success rate on follow-up?
So about 100 cases I've operated. About 5 or 6 cases have come back of DCR failure.
It looks pretty dangerous that whenever someone is drilling a hole in the wall,
Yes.
there's a tendency that it will go through.
Yes.
How do you control for the rotation? How much for the
So,
rotation for
this-
your
yeah.
drill and how safe is your guard? Because you're saying that you either adjust for 3 millimeters or 4 millimeters.
Yes.
How do you exactly know that you're not going to go moving from one side of the holes to the other?
So this is a slow speed machine. It's got only 200 RPMs. That is 200 circles per minute. And it's got a pistol grip, so you can control your, the rotation of the drill. And don't go, continuously. You can go in bursts. Okay, that way you can control the drill going through into the nose. And there is a guard. The guard will never allow the drill to penetrate more than 4 millimeters.
Do you take a technical permission or
Yes.
take a consent from a review board to conduct this study?
Well, I did not.
This looks to be pretty dangerous because the thickness of the bone is hardly 1 to 1.5 millimeter. You said you penetrate 3 to 4 millimeter.
Sir, in our area, the nasal bone is pretty thick. In some parts. No. I mean the lacrimal fossa. That's what I meant. Yes. In some, in our area, it is pretty thick. Actually, I had slides.
You just want them better. Yes, including from the United States, you can see in our area the bone that better because university is accepted that this is the thinnest bone. If this is the thickest, what about other thick bones?
So, that's why the guard has been made, which
this idea is not going to be potash. There is nothing going to support this. What do you think? This idea is how do you ensure that it doesn't pierce the nasal mucous membrane or mucosa? One thing you are taking a guard, but even then, you cannot be sure. That's right. You pick up the question.
so you can adjust the guard, like you can just go 1 millimeter.
How will you adjust it? Because the idea, what we are doing usually is we keep on just looking for things. When we think it's going to be then we break it. And then just separate it from the middle. But you are ensuring that the drill that you are going through, which is not going to happen in every case if you are guessing.
I'll suggest one thing. If there's a break and then there's filling like that, which pushes the nasal mucosa, doesn't cut it, and the drill cuts up it. Pushes the nasal mucosa, so it gets separated.
You can try future. You can have something in the front area.
Which pushes the nasal mucosa. He has not sought to respect of it.
Next session. Paper. The best paper from Chhattisgarh Ophthalmic Society, Dr. Anand Saxena Award. The presenting author is Dr. Mihir Mishra. The topic is transcanalicular laser assisted DCF, a viable option.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a transcanalicular laser assisted DCF. It's a viable option from Indian Institute right now. No financial disclosure. Patients with nasal tract obstruction are commonly operated by external DCR technique by ophthalmologists with high success rate, but with associated complications and morbidity. New developments in the field of DCR is evolving to shorten patient recovery time, to decrease complication rate, and to avoid surgical skipping steps, to shorten procedure time, and also to adapt as an OPD procedure. So transcanalicular laser assisted DCR will be considered to be advantageous because of the shorter recovery period, the easy tolerability by the patients, favorable cosmetic results, and an equivalent success rate. The purpose of the study was analysis of transcanalicular laser assisted DCR in relation to the success rate and varied outcomes. It was a prospective non-comparative case series study which was done between June 2011 to March 2012. 18 patients of primary nasolacrimal duct obstruction were taken, of which 5 were bilateral. Total 23 NLDO were included. The procedure was performed by a single surgeon by the DAG laser machine. There is a DAG laser machine of 980 nanometer. The regional anesthesia was given in all patients except one patient who was operated under the general anesthesia. 10% xylocaine and a absorbed cotton gauze bag was applied into the nasal cavity and removed after 15 minutes before the surgery. Cases with associated nasal pathology were excluded from the study. The procedure basically the inferior and superior contact were dilated, heart stop failed with the probe, with the lacrimal probe, and 635 micron laser fiber proceeded through the upper canaliculate to the sac. A 4 mm 0-degree angle rigid nasal endoscope was introduced into the nasal cavity. The aiming laser beam was identified transmucosally intranasally, and under endoscopy guidance, continuous wave contact mode laser energy was fired between 6 to 8 watt, and the lacrimal bone was and the nasal mucosa were evaporated and formulated. After the withdrawal of the laser fiber, lacrimal passage irrigation was done with saline solution and antibiotic solution, and the patency noted. Post-operative regimen included ciprofloxacin and dexamethasone eye drop combination 3 times daily for 4 weeks, and budesonide nasal spray was used 2 times a day intranasally for 1 month. The patency of the restore was got by the lacrimal passage lavage on first day, first week, first month, and 3 months post-operative intervals. So average post-operative follow-up period was 6 months, ranging 3 to 9 months. Average operating time was 11 minutes. One case had undergone bicanalicular intubation with unilateral NLDO. One patient with unilateral NLDO lost following the first post-op visit. The success of the procedure was defined by absence of epidural that was subjective and or patency of the lacrimal passage on indication that was also. So these are the instruments which were used during the procedure. This is the endoscope, this is the machine along with the endoscope machine, and this is the laser machine. These are the instruments which are required, and this is the anesthetic, topical anesthetic nasal drop, nasal spray. Procedure in brief, the punctum was dilated, both lower and upper. And the laser fiber probe was placed from the upper punctum into the canaliculi. Then the laser was fired. You can see the machine in operation here. And the osteotomy was made through and through. From the lacrimal sac to the nasal mucosa was extended as per requirement, and it was observed through the endoscope. And following that, the patency was noted by irrigating. The fluid is coming inside the nose, so it's not coming out here as the patient is not. So total 23 endoscopic assisted transcanacular laser DCI procedure patients were done. 13 patients had unilateral anagio while 5 had bilateral anagio. Bilateral cases, second procedure was done 3 to 4 weeks after one side. The age ranged from 6 to 88 years. Females predominantly compared to males. Absence of epicura and patient patent nasal duct basis on irrigation was found in around 22 patients. That was 95%. Out of 23 treated NSDU, one patient had epicura with partial patency of irrigation, on irrigation. So laterally mostly they were unilateral, and females were more as compared to the males. The age group ranged from 51 to 60, were more elderly patients were more as compared to the children and teenagers. And overall success was, anatomical success rate was 95%, and overall success rate, because there was in spite of the anatomical success, there was epicura, so in those cases it was 91.3%. So transcanacular DCR can be compared with the external DCR with the standard alternate technique. External DCR is successful statistically in 90-95% of cases according to various studies. So we have various studies here which shows that they have good success rate, and it is more prevalent in females and LTO. And these are the success rate which are varied from 70 to 82, 85 and 90% over the years. So our success rate was 91.3% overall. So in conclusion, transcanacular dialysis assisted ecosystem is a fast, safe, minimally invasive procedure with appropriate case selection. It's a high success rate with excellent cosmesis and higher patient satisfaction. So it's a viable alternative to conventional external DCR with near equivalent result. Thank you.
Dr. Mihir, your follow-up, maximum follow-up was 6 months.
Yeah, it's a short follow-up.
What happens with the laser DCR? The problem starts after 6 months.
Yeah.
I have operated 1,362 cases till now,
Yeah.
and the follow-up, maximum follow-up, I have
2 years.
7 years.
7 years.
I started first time laser DCR in India in 2006. So, the shortest follow-up by my follow-up is 6 months. So, what happens after 6 months, the failure comes.
Exactly.
What is success in 93% will become less than 30% after follow-up 2 years.
Absolutely. May not be 30%, but my
reasons why.
because I have
I'm telling you follow-up 7 years.
Yeah.
Because I was promoting laser DCR for last 7 years. Because I started. What is the common cause of failure you can find?
Yes.
The common cause of failure is not the bone opening you are making.
Yes.
You can enlarge bone opening as much as possible. 9 mm, 10 mm, 10 mm. Problem is start when you are opening making in the sac. Because probe is going in the sac like this, and you are making a opening in the sac like this, it is small. And bone you are enlarging so much. But sac opening that goes close, because when we are high failure rate, we try to find out the cause.
Yes.
And then we started doing open surgery along with the laser DCR. So we opened the area and we try to find out where is the fault. When we find out, when we are going to open the sac, because it is entering the probe is running like this. So opening the sac is like this. And bone we are enlarging too much because it bone is visible. What happens to the sac? It gets closed after 6 months. So what conclusion we have come to now, laser DCR? Intubation is a must in laser DCR. If you do not do intubate, it is going to be failure. I advocate it 100%.
Yes.
Because on our follow-up, we have many problems. We have patients with private practice, it is difficult to satisfy them.
Exactly.
So now we have started DCR, laser DCR along with the intubation, because very good intubation to rest up. So it is, while the intubation is almost 99.9% success rate. That I can tell you. But But we started now, that's very good. I like him doing laser DCR.
And moreover, I would like to highlight one thing. I have taken NLTO cases which are just having watering, registration of clear fluid, because not mucopurulent or purulent discharge. Exactly. So these cases are slightly better. We have to follow.
Yeah, maybe I think Dr. Madhav is going to tell us what is the size of the incubation tube used
The diffusion tube is common size.
2 millimeters.
The size is not very important because you are keeping there for. You have made a 2 millimeter opening for patent. That is regular more than enough.
I am not doing this one because I am for the total different specialty. But even my first opinion is that if we get a much more better success rate, then all of the surgeries for SAD, they will be, I think, the second-rate surgeries because this is going to stay for a long period and a much better possibility.
Yeah.
For 2 months.
Minimum
You can.
8 to 12 weeks we can get the incubation.
So after 7 years, sir, you are now not doing laser DRC.
I am doing with incubation.
And incubation, how much follow-up do you have and what are the results there?
I have followed minimum 3 years because 2007 has started and then after 2010 all cases came with the failure. Then I thought instead of taking patient again I should start with the now it is 99%.
But it's a very good
Especially in the young patient, or elder patient who have cardiac problems and the problems.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna. So we have another paper by Dr. Shweta Pandey. Which describes clinical feature management outcome of retinal vasculitis in gestational fever.
Bangalore. I will be presenting about clinical features management and outcome of retinal vasculitis in rickettsia fever. No financial disclosure. Rickettsia are non-motile, non-slow-forming, pleomorphic gram-negative leucobacilli. They are usually transmitted by vectors like ticks, fleas, and shivers. They depend on the host for survival. The humans are only incidental hosts, and diseases like Rocky Mountain spotted fever, rickettsial pox, Mediterranean spotted fever, etc. can occur in humans. Now what happens when it takes bites, the organisms spread lymphohematogeneously and multiply in the endothelial and smooth muscle cells of the blood vessels, especially involving organs like brain, heart, kidney and the eye, and thus cause vasculitis. Ocular manifestations in these patients are, on the basis of various studies, have been found to be conjunctivitis with petechial lesions on the bulbar conjunctiva, mild uveitis, vaso-occlusive phenomena, transretinal vein obstructions, anterior ischemic optic neuropathy, retinitis, and retinal hemorrhages. So our study was a descriptive study of clinical features, management, and outcome of rickettsia fever in 2 adult patients. There were 2 males, 35 and 40 years old, with a history of headache, fever, and macular rash referred by the physician. They had history since 10 days. The visual acuity in the first patient was 6/16 both the eyes. In the second, it was 6/24. Anterior segment findings were normal in both the patients. There was no evidence of uveitis. The pupils were briskly reacting to both direct and conceptual light. Now, in the first patient's fundus, the fundus was a clear media with normal opticness, a cutis ratio of about 0.9. The retinal vessels were normal. In the right eye, the background retina showed a area of retinal ischemia, which was horizontally oval, 1 to 10 meter in size, which was in the superior macular area involving the fovea. In the left eye, there was an area of retinal ischemia of about 3/2 diopters in size, which was extending from the fovea to the superiotemporal arcade. There was sheathing which was present. A similar lesion was also seen inferior to the disc. The IOP in both the patients was normal. The patient 2 also had a similar lesion involving the macula. So as the patient presented with fever with a rash, they were subjected to an array of investigations including complete hemogram, PSR, coagulation profile, peripheral smear for malaria, dengue, IgM, viral, leptospira, and wheat Felix test for rickettsia fever, which was found to be raised. So as the patients had fever with macular rash, positive wheat Felix test, and retinal vasculitis, a provisional diagnosis of rickettsia fever was made, and the patients were started on oral doxycycline 100 mg
twice a day for a week. Since retinal vasculitis was also involving the macula, we started the patients on oral steroid of prednisolone of 1 mg per kg body weight in 2 divided doses. These patients were re-evaluated after a week and were found to decrease in size. The steroids were tapered over a month. The follow-up after a month showed that the patient had resolved retinal vasculitis. The visual acuity in the first patient had improved to 624 in both eyes and 612 in the second patient. After that, these patients were lost to follow-up. So a definite diagnosis of rickettsia fever can only be made by an indirect immunofluorescence assay or by a sample biopsy which is taken during the acute stage when the rash is present. So most of the time this is not available and our diagnosis is usually empiric. It is based on fever with a history of travel to an endemic area, exposure to a vector, clinical signs like macropapular rash involving the palms and soles or the presence of an eschar, thrombocytopenia, low or normal WBC counts, elevated hepatic enzyme levels, hyponatremia and rising lead to exciters. So the presence of vasculitis in such patients helps to diagnose rickettsial fever early. Now rickettsial retinal vasculitis can also present in multiple forms. It can either be a focal vasculitis, a multifocal or a diffuse vasculitis. Sometimes it is complicated with vaso-occlusive events like transretinal vein occlusions. Very rarely this can present with findings, that is with neuroretinitis or optic neuritis. In conclusion, a definite diagnosis of rickettsial fever is difficult in the acute stage because our diagnosis is made from paired serum samples. When it comes to ocular manifestations, initial stages the vision is not usually affected. So these patients have to be routinely screened to rule out any retinal involvement. If vision-threatening lesions are present, systemic steroids should be started in addition to antibiotics. Though the role of steroids is still controversial, in the end, prevention against tick bites in endemic areas is the mainstay of disease.
These are nice observations. I think the only thing is, what is the cause of ischemia and this? How vasculitis leads on to ischemia? It's a simple question.
In this particular group.
Simple question. How vasculitis leads on to
the phospholipids A2 which is present will start blocking the vessels which are present, thus creating an area of retinal ischemia.
Secondly, that is a very symptomatic condition, a condition which is not very self-limiting once you start antibiotic system. So you will recommend a systemic steroid or would like to go for topical because it is something of like surveillance and all.
So only these patients in which the lesion are actually involving the macula will start them on oral steroids. Otherwise they will not start them on oral.
May I ask a question? What's the false positivity of because that's what your entire diagnosis is based on.
So actually we are not basing our whole diagnosis on paired serum samples of these collects. It's only a raised serum sample. That's why we are saying that just because it is positive doesn't mean that it can be a rickettsial fever. So you should correlate all the findings, and if there is a retinal vasculitis, it aids in the diagnosis.
So all these patients will not be actually treated.
No, after 2 weeks when they were repaired, the paired serum samples were collected, they were found to be rickettsial fever.
Only all positive patients were included in your study.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Sweta. With this, we come to the end of the first part of the session. We have now our lacrimal session, starting with a canalicular laceration repair, a new treatment modality on the horizon by Dr. Vishnukant Ghansikar.
Good afternoon, respected faculty and my dear colleagues. So I will be speaking about canalicular laceration repair, a new treatment modality on horizon. This was the study conducted at AIIMS. We have no financial interest or relationship to disclose, as we are all aware of lacrimal system's anatomy and how the tears are formed from lacrimal gland and drained into NLD via the canalicular. Now coming on to the canalicular laceration. Laceration of the canalicular are common because of the exposed position of the canalicular at both the lips, and they account almost for 16% of the eyelid injury, either by direct or indirect blows, and they should be repaired as early as possible so as to avoid the risk of scarring and epithelialization of the wound. Now the treatment options available in literature are either a mini-Monaca stent, which is considered a gold standard, but it is costing around 7,000 rupees. A Venflone pediatric IV catheter, some of the people use, lateral intubation stent, pictal-assisted 5-0 proline, or a bicanalicular intubation. But the problem with the pediatric Venflo is quite rigid and it is very difficult to navigate it through the J-shaped, canaliculated shape. Plus the trocar which is there is quite pointed, it kind of causes trauma to the canaliculus, can lead to a canalicular block afterwards. And 5-0 proline is easier said than done actually. So we thought, why not to use a silicone rod sling which we use for TOSI surgery as a monocanalucular stent, and hence to develop an effective indigenous type of monocanalucular intubation system which is much readily available and at much affordable cost. The lacuna knowledge being, it is quite difficult to procure for a general ophthalmologist the mini-Monaca stent which is there, and in case it is not available, what else has to be used, nobody knows clearly. So most of the studies available in literature have a follow-up of around say less than 6 months period. So we wanted to do a study. This was a retrospective case study done at RC Center from May 2012 to 2013. The inclusion criteria being all the patients with canalicular laceration presenting adult casualty, and after confirming by passing a probe that there is canalicular tear, they were included, and both the demographic and data and clinical characteristic of this patient along with the surgical outcome was noted. The outcome was noted both subjectively and objectively. Subjective being a complete success if there is an absent epiphora, partial success if there is an improvement in epiphora, and failure if there is no improvement in epiphora. And objective outcome on the bitter antibiotic test, which is just a modification of the saccharin test where you put a drop of antibiotic in the sac and ask the patient if you can feel the bitter test of the antibiotic. The fluorescent disappearance test and the lacrimal irrigation was performed in 3 adult cases. So intervention done was a canalicular laceration repair with silicone rod sling as a monocanalucular stent. The cut end was identified with the help of either an air bubble or other colored light agents like Vitarin. And the silicone rod sling which we used, what we did was we cut a 5 to 6 centimeter part of the silicone sling and we passed it into the canaliculus, as you can see in this surgical video. So, not starting. Just a minute, sir. Sorry for the time delay. So what we did actually was we cut a 5 to 6 centimeter part of the sling which was there, and sorry for the delay. So this is how a patient presented to us. First and foremost, we dilated the punctum with the help of Bowman's probe. Then by passing a Bowman's probe, we confirmed that there is a canalicular tear. This was followed with cutting a 5 to 6 centimeter part of a sling. The sling is oral sling which we are using for a TOSI surgery is around 20 centimeter long. The advantage being it is 0.3 millimeter in diameter versus a lacrimal intubation stent which is 0.2 millimeter in diameter. So it kind of completely expands the canalicular system. This is passed inside the sac and it coiled inside the sac for say minimum of 3 to 4 centimeter. Then the horizontal lid margin closure is done, followed by skin closure, and this tube is fixed to the lower lid skin and the excess end is kind of cut at the end like this. And so this is how the final outcome will be on the patients. So coming on to the presentation again. Sorry for the delay. So this is how we did the surgery by putting the oral sling which is there as an monocanalucular intubation. So these are few of the patients which I operated. This is the canalicular sling, the silicone sling which we are using. These are the 3 patients. So what we had was 10 patients, out of which 2 were female, the mean age being 16 years, and surprisingly 70% of them were in the pediatric age group. The duration of time lapse after injury till presentation was almost 9 hours in our patient. Constant watering of eyes was the most redness and history trauma are the most common signs which they presented. The associated eye injury include low laceration, epithelial defects, and a large suture eyelid, large laceration. Lower canaliculus was injured in all the 10 cases. We have a follow-up of mean around 6.2 months, the longest being around 12 months. Now coming on to the etiology, brow hook injury was surprisingly the most common cause in our series of 4 patients, followed by arrow injury in 2, and 1 each in road traffic accident, nail injury, tree branch, and wooden plank injury. Now coming on to the result, anatomical success on staging was almost 100% in all the cases, but the complete success, which was defined as absent epiphora, was seen in 90% of the patient, 9 eyes. 1 patient, there was a failure after doing an nuclear black hole scintigraphy, we found that it was a medial ectopia. It was actually causing the watering and not the patent seal itself. And one of the patients has a slight difference in the stem at 1 week, which was repositioned again. So this is the patient with the medial ectopia, where you can see on the right side the dye is not flowing through, and this is after a diamond conjunctivaloplasty on the medial side. You can see the dye is flowing now. This is again a surgical video. I'll just before this video because the video is not running out. Now coming on to the discussion, the similarity with the Western literature are we have a similar demographic profile with the male preponderance, pediatric age being more at the risk, and direct injury was most common. Watering with the redness was the most common presentation, and dissimilarities being the time lapse after injury field presentation was almost 9 to 10 hours in our patient, probably because of lack of awareness of general ophthalmologists. That was the main cause of delayed treatment. 70% of the cases were in the pediatric age group, and Blount hook injury was the most common cause in our series. So to conclude, the silicone rod sling as monoconjunctival stent is definitely an effective tool. So by this means we are avoiding the high cost and unavailability of the mini-Monaca stent. So we are developing an indigenous monocapillary integration system with silicone sling, which is much readily available. And the use of silicone rod sling as monocapillary stent is technically more sound than use of Ventron or 5-0 Prolene suture, and it gives almost ample success compared to the widely popular but costly Monaca stent. Thank you.
Dear Dr. Vishwanath, we appreciate that this is a very good technique, but no, this is not a new treatment.
Yes, sir.
Because we were doing it for a long time when molecular stent was not available in India. But luckily they are now made by Indian companies and very reasonable rate they are available in India. So this is definitely a good technique. Okay? Yes. But it's not a very good technique. You have done a good presentation.
Thank you, sir.
And Vishnu, blouse hook injury is not surprisingly common, because if you see my colleague Milind Naik, if you see my colleague Milind Naik, he has published in 2004 in American Journal of Ophthalmology a series of 28 cases with blouse hook injury.
But yes, there is a lacunar indication.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking that since you said that the blouse hook injury is surprising.
Yeah, sir.
It is not surprising.
What's the age group? What's the age group?
Pardon? Pediatrics. Obviously,
yes, nowadays with the trauma coming more and more, people thinking about road traffic accident or a kind of a direct injury coming, but still blouse hook injury is common.
Yeah,
we thought in 2003 it was common, probably in 2013 that went so.
That's all.
I just brought up the point, but I think it depends on where the injury is to be very frank. I think if it's too close to the sac, our approach will be different. If it is a sharp edge injury and if it's brain trauma, again, I think it's going to be different. So we are going to be very selective in cases in which we can do this. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Cannula retrocystal endoscopy, a simple, innovative, cost-effective method of flexible surgery. The presenting author is Dr. Mehul Ashwin Kumar Shah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Cannula ECR. Microfinance Limited. Epicura is a common problem encountered in ophthalmology due to nasal alignment of obstruction, chronic and acute chronic inflammation, or tumor, or trauma, or congenital malformation. Most common sign is regurgitation of tubular material on completion of the sac, and the treatment modality available are antibiotic therapy or surgical management. Now the PCR is done by the external endoscopy tool. However, newer variations in lacrimal surgery continue to be developed to optimize the treatment of lacrimal disorder. Various surgical techniques must be evaluated and compared on using criteria of long-term success, rate of complication, patient satisfaction, and efficiency of healthcare delivery. Now the objective is to innovate cost-effective method for lacrimal surgery and compare success rate of this method with the other method. Material methodology. It is a prospective cohort study. Patient reporting to Dristinadar OPD with Epicura between March 2011 to June 2012. Pre, intra, and post-operative details filled in the pre-tested compressed form. Inclusion criteria are nasolacrimal duct obstruction, patent canaliculate, normal eye function, and without any lacrimal pathology. While patients with a less than 4-week follow-up, previous lacrimal surgery, and canalicular obstruction patient are excluded. Detailed history was taken. Examination of the sac area for damage, swelling, tenderness, fistula, and regurgitation of content of pressure, assessment of punctum for size and acquisition of punctum, and patency of lateral system by signature. And ocular and nasal examination also done. Now the surgical procedure, puncta are dilated with the punctal dilator, probing done to upper and lower canalicus to confirm the canalicus patency. Specially designed cannula of 22 gauge with blunt tip and a side pot introduced to the lower canalicus and made it at 45 degrees to lower the margin, taking care not to raise the hand above eye level. Push the cannula through sac wall. Lacrimal hole and nasal mucosa enter in middle meatus, which can be easily seen with the broadside of nasal endoscope. Syringing done and patency are done. Then the cannula was withdrawn and push it again and filling the edge of the hole. In this way, the hole is expanded by 2 to 3 mm. This is the our cannula. Post-operative treatment by oral antibiotics and analgesic antibiotic eye drop and laser culture. This is our follow-up visit. Minimum follow-up is up to 6 months. Surgical and post-operative data are exported in Excel sheet and analyzed with the SPSS 70. This post-operative follow-up data. Now the result. Most of 86% is female, while 30% patients are male. Most common is present age group is 15 to 60 years, which includes 28 patients. And preoperative status, most commonly patients present with chronic negative cystitis. Others are mycosis and fistula. Success according to pre-op status, chronic negative cystitis patients have a higher success rate. Out of 59, 54 were better. And while in mucosis, 18 patients were operated and 50% success rate we get. Success rate according to the follow-up period. In earlier up to the 50 days, the success rate is high, and as the days progress, the success is gradually decreased. And further management of the failed cases are done by the intercystic implant, power implant, TCL or TCL. Now, compare study with cases not having mucosal or fistula. With the operate 80 cases out of 65 chronic cystitis, while 15 cases are with mucosal or fistula. So the higher success rate get in chronic cystitis. Discussion. This study comprises 80 patients. Out of which 69 female and 11 male. Overall success rate is 81% with a mean follow-up of 247 days, with standard deviation 296.2. The government reported success rate of 90% by conventional PCR, and Kepma et al. Get success rate of 85% in PCR. Pawar et al. Reported success rate of 98% by silicone implant. Significant difference according to pre-operative status. 50% success rate in cases of mucosal and lacrimal fistula, probably because of the recurrent inflammation and scarring, which causing early healing capacity. Significant difference according to follow-up duration, maybe because of the more scarring, which was failure. The weaknesses of this studies are small number, need minor intervention during follow-up visit, and still to be studied for a longer follow-up. And strength is cost-effective, simple technique, and success rate is comparable to other gold standard technique. We may perform this procedure for chronic cystitis, that is, without mucosal or fistula. We provide higher success rate, as this procedure may be performed in office without having a large capital cost and learning curve also.
The longest follow-up we have?
Up to 2 to 3 years we have followed.
What is the success we have there?
As the gradually time passes up to 2 years, the success rate is decreased. But every visit we done in OPD, same procedure in our OPD.
What will be the cause you have find out? What will be the cause of failure?
Fibrosis, scarring, fibrosis. So because the opening is very small compared to others.
So what you recommend now?
Sir, it is a...
Once the case is failure after 2 years, so should we go for this? And if we go for this, why we should go for this?
Sir, first of all, this technique is very easy. If the patient is old age or other...
for that we can use laser DCR because success is high. But in these cases, failure is because of 2 reasons. Number one, financial displacement of the practice. So if you are yourself saying it is failure after 2 years, so we should find out the better procedure and we should try to improve this procedure. How can we remove the zero of this impact?
Sir, but if you don't
you are doing it too, so you should go ahead with the technique. You can find out the causes of failures and should try to improve them.
Sir, but we done this procedure in a same follow-up policy. The success rate is increased. If the patient is come after the very long follow-up, then the...
In India, you will not have a very frequent follow-up or DCR cases because they come from the remote area that they are not very well normal. So you should keep in mind and you should take up the procedure according to this. Because in private practice, you are sitting on the government, it is very difficult to keep the cases they are training. We recommend everybody take the procedure, their success rate is very high and already people prove.
The second thing, if you go for the cataract surgery,
that's the
so this procedure we can do.
That we can say.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Now we invite online presentation.
This is the endoscope that I'm going to talk, which has been adapted from a salivary endoscope, which is used to visualize the Stenson's duct. And it actually is a 0.6 millimeter endoscope and which has a port which is there, and this port is for irrigation. You can also customize and make a port separately to have something like a Dormia basket where in case if there is any dacryolyth, you can go and use the basket to remove that one. And the other end is very compatible with Vedic Karlsruhe's endoscope, and this is the endoscopes that we have, so it's quite compatible because it's from the same thing. Just briefly to take you, if you can please dim the slides. Excuse me. If you can please dim the slide, it will be much easier to visualize that. When we go through with the dacryl endoscope, this is how the canaliculi looks like. Canaliculi is usually a bit whitish mucosa with a central lumen, which end on appears like a bit transparent. You can see the difference in the color. That means that is the place where you are going to go in that direction based on the color perceptions as it changes when you go through the lumen. But as you come into the lacrimal sac, initially you would find that the illumination is very less. This is the point where the illumination should now be increased to have a good view of the lacrimal sac. This is the sac, and I'm at the sac, and I'm looking at the nasolacrimal duct here. And this, what you see, is the lowermost part, valvular part of the lacrimal system. It's not a Hasner's wall, obviously it's not a Hasner's wall, but then there are numerous such folds that you would come across in a normal system, which is very important for the flow of the tears. These are examples of the mucosal folds that you see in the nasolacrimal duct. There are many things that it has a diagnostic indication like canalicular stenosis, like you see here, and it's a bit more stenosed in this particular area. It could be a partial canalicular obstruction, like you can see the hazy. Most of the time the fibrosis looks a bit hazy and whitish, and this is an example of a complete canalicular obstruction, like you can see here. This is the mucosa, the erythron that you see, and the entire thing is a chunk of the fibrous floor. So the aim of the study was to study the efficacy of dacroendoscopic guided recanalizations of the canaliculi and the nasolacrimal duct. This was a prospective international study which included 20 lacrimal passages with a mean age of 27.2 years, because most of them also had the nasolacrimal duct. But what is significant is that while dealing with the congenital population, there were people who had undergone syringing more than once. I'll just very briefly take you through the videos of how a canalicular obstruction or how it actually appears. Yeah, if you can see, this is how the canaliculi appears. It's very important not to touch the endoscope to the canalicular wall because it may suddenly spontaneously start bleeding. A very good indication is, if you can see at the end of it, there will be a lot of folds and it's like an accordion kind of tube. So you should be very careful when you go in. And at the distant end, you start seeing now a reflection of light that the endoscope is pushing. So just go towards that. There you see it's coming into your view. And at the distal canaliculus, you're still going forward. And there you see bang on, it's a complete canalicular obstruction. Yeah, thank you. And the same thing once we go with the Cystoscopine that Dr. Grover talked in the morning, you can go ahead and under endoscopic visualization, you can neatly punch out the segment that is obstructed, and I'll skip this. I'm in the same patient. I'll just show you how it appears post-operatively. There's the same thing. So what you see is that you see a lot of, the fibrovascular tissue. Once you refine it, you would see that there is a bit of blood somewhere there, and that's where when you should use a port. See, there's a bleed on the surface of it from there, but you can still see that it is quite patent now. But you should just wash out to see the patency appropriately. Now see, I'm using the side port to flush the canalicula, and there you can see it's disappearing, and there you can see at the base there's still a bit of it which is not going to matter because it's now entire opening is quite clear. So this is a very easy way to go back and again check. But what is also important and where I would like to stress is the dactyloendoscopic guided probing along with the nasal endoscopic guided. This is a case of a nasal child who had undergone twice cranial probing, and you can see at multiple levels. This is the Sagdat junction where I am at present. You can see at multiple levels there are on the wall here on the wall you can see there is a fibrous tissue, and then this is the Sagdat junction. You can see, and then there is a nice chunk of fibrous tissue over here on this side. And at multiple levels you find that there is a chunk of fibrous tissue, probably because of the past probing also, and obviously of pathology. You can see there's a good amount of chunk. And then this is, once I enter the sac, I find that this area is a bit reasonably clear. So most of the problem for this child was in the nasal abdomen. That obviously you go ahead and this is the nasal endoscopy view of the probe in the inferior meatus. So you make sure that you cleared everything under the guidance from both the canalicular side as well as the dactyloendoscopic, as well as the nasal endoscopy side. And then you go back again and check. And now see, you see only at the periphery. You can see a very thin plaque attached to the periphery. This is a small one that needs to be washed out. And you can see again a rim here of the fibrovascular, remnant fibrovascular tissue. And you can also see a bit of bleeding over there. But fair enough, a good, nice opening without any kind of obstruction. And it is not bleeding quite heavily. It just means that you have not been very aggressive on the mucosa of the nasal abdominal tract. And then obviously, once we do that, we need to go ahead and again go through the nasal endoscopy once you have cleared everything. And obviously, this is the proper intubation that I am doing. So we retain the intubations for a period of 12 weeks. There is 6 months minimum follow-up post-tube removal. Anatomical success was defined as patency on irrigation, and functional success was defined as absence of epifora. And this is what is the anatomical and functional success rate were 60% for canalicular recanalization and 70% for nasal abdominal. But this is at 6 months. That's what was important. And we found that of the 7 lacrimal passages, 6 reoccluded, those among the failures, 6 reoccluded after the tube removal, and 1 had stent prolapse, but there were no false passages. So in conclusion, I would say that dactyloendoscopic guided recanalization of the lacrimal passage is an emerging technique to perform a complete recanalization. It has a very steep learning curve, and it needs probably years of more experience to be able to come to a point where we might be able to avoid a diagnosis to endoscopy. Thank you so much.
Good presentation. This instrument is very good instrument through which we can see from the puncture to the opening of the nasal apparatus into the nose. And whatever we do with the type of visualization. So chances of success are very, very high. I started using this instrument in 2008, and luckily I was studying there in 2009 because I got to find a best paper award on this same topic in 2009. That was at that time for innovation and diagnosis of surgery. So that is a good presentation, but you have to be long follow-up.
Yes.
So because this is a good tech, but two problems come to the way. Number one is the learning curve. Very difficult to handle instrument, very costly instrument. At the time, I don't know, at the time it was 20 lakh rupees that I purchased in 2008. Now it is much costly. Secondly, handling the instrument is very cozy. You have to clean the instrument very clearly. Secondly, the learning curve is very difficult and long curve. So we need a long follow-up for building the instrument.
I totally agree.
In order to endoscopy, we see that you have to inflate. And this is a very limit.
Yes.
Then go ahead or just go ahead.
What is ideal is to use a pump side port. No, we don't need. Yes, I agree. That's a very, very valid point and very nice point. But what we need to do is we need to use a side port to irrigate one before we intervene. Oh yes, we have to. No, those endoscopes. is very important is to dilate those passages before we go in, and that's what I do. Yes, that's very good. Gas, the thing is that gas retention is not very good in the system because okay. So yeah, it is taken. So yes, that's very good. Thank you.
Last paper and yes, sorry, sir. Revision of failed external DCR, our experience from a tertiary eye care center by Dr. Shamir Mohabbatram.
Good afternoon all, respected members of the dais and seniors and colleagues. I thank all for this opportunity to discuss our experience. We have no financial disclosures in this presentation. As you all know, external DCR is a gold standard technique with a success rate of around 90%. Though there is an emerging trend towards endoscopic surgery, still the preferred technique is continuously evolving, and the main purpose is to find or to create an anatomical and functional patterns of the lacrimal duct. Now, various factors have been identified in failure of DCRs, maybe which are caused in the ostium or in the canalicular or nasal pathology, or a certain related. But overall, when we find any revision of unsuccessful surgery can be done either through an external or endoscopic approach, and the revision, the success rate is close to 80%. With this background, you can see a number of failed cases in our institute. The purpose of our study is to analyze the clinical profile and outcome of revision surgery done in cases of failed primary external diaphragmatic endoscopy cases. The study is a retrospective design conducted at L. Prasad Eye Institute, Bhubaneswar from June 2006 to June 2013. In this, we reviewed the medical records of all patients included, and all the patients had a detailed ophthalmic history and a comprehensive ocular examination, including syringing to check for pregnancy of the lacrimal system. An informed consent was obtained from all the patients. Now, patient who presented to us with history of persistent epiphora, a history of prior SAC surgery with a documented evidence of SAC surgery done either in the institute or elsewhere, or with a visible scar and having non-pregnancy of the lacrimal system were included in the study, as shown in these pictures. And we excluded all other causes of failed DCR like endoscopic, endoplaser, endocanalicular, or failed DCR due to trauma. We have 49 patients, 49 eyes of 47 patients, and we followed them for more than 3 months, and ultimately 38 patients were considered for final analysis of the outcomes. Females were more commonly affected than males, and the commonest age group of our patients were between 21 to 60 years, the range from 4 to 80 years. Epiphora was the most common presentation. However, in 4 cases, presented with acute gastrocystitis, and 3 of them had lacrimal abscess. Now, considering the most important aspect that 42 patients or 42 eyes had prior surgery, only one surgery has been done prior to a revision surgery, and out of them, when we have revised, the success rate was close to 97%. And in 7 cases, more than two surgeries have been performed, and the success rate was close to 100%. Depicting that there was no difference in this outcome. Out of 49 eyes, 9 cases were institutional failure, means most of the cases were done by our fellows, as ours is a training institute. And 40 cases or 40 eyes, around 82% were external institutional cases which were referred to us. It is very important to note that the time to fail in institutional cases were rough, mostly at around 6 weeks, whereas for institutional or extensional cases it was around 1.5 years. This could be explained on the basis of because of the late referral pattern in our studies. Now, 28 eyes or 57% of the patients were revised with DCR, MNC, and intubation. And 5 eyes had to undergo a DCT procedure, which is very unlikely or unfortunate because 4 of the eyes had got an ocular comorbidity like endophthalmitis and subluxated cataract, for which visual rehabilitation was necessary to be done early. Now, the most important aspect of our study was to find out the possible cause of failure. What went wrong with the prior surgery? We found out that granulation tissue at the ostium was the single most common factor of failure in about 31% of the eyes. Whereas if you note the 10 eyes or about 20% of the cases had an inadequate ostium, an intact sac flap and an intact nasal flap. This indicates that the surgery was started or initiated was giving us a false impression of a scar or a false impression that surgery was done, but actually there was no surgery done, or the surgery was abandoned in the middle because of unknown reasons. Now in other cases like intact sac flap or intact nasal flap, if you club together all together, it amounts to about 45% of the cases where the entire abnormality lies with the sac flap, nasal flap or with the ostium. Now a very good example to depict this finding is this old 60-year-old lady where a DCR was done on the left eye, which failed, and when we revised, we found extensive granulation tissue over the ostium. We had no idea what we are actually dealing with it. We excised the entire granulation tissue and we could find a sac underneath having a cut, just a cut without any flaps. Now we sent this tissue for histopathological examination and we found that the entire tissue was nasal mucosa. And when we compared this with another tissue sent in case of primary DCR, we found this is the nasal upper pictures was that of the lacrimal sac mucosa and the lower ones was that of the nasal mucosa. So you can very well make out that in this case the entire tissue was made up of nasal mucosa. Now coming to the outcome and follow-up, now we had 49 eyes of 47 patients, out of which 11 cases were lost to follow-up. They didn't follow up after 1 week. So at the end of 3 months, we had 38 eyes, out of which 1 failed, and we had a success rate of 97.36. We were very happy. But when it comes to 6 months of follow-up, 27 eyes completed follow-up, and we had a success rate of 71%. And the mean follow-up period was 10.31 months, obviously less than 1 year, which is depicted in almost all the literature. But considering the scenario in our setting or in Indian setting, it's very important, it's very difficult to get a longer follow-up. Now comparing our study with the study that have been conducted in 2011, 12 and 13, ours is a retrospective study. The inclusion criteria in all of the studies that included external, endoscopic or traumatic, whereas we have included only external cases, excluding all other cases. The demographic pattern was similar to other cases.
The time is over.
The other surgeries, in all of the cases it was a single surgeon, but we had a multiple surgeon involved, so that could have affected the surgical outcome. Now to conclude, considering the statistics of 18% institutional cases versus 82% extra institutional, 45% of the cases where the basics of surgery were not involved, and considering the overall success rate of 71%, I would recommend that an adequate focused training for external research is required for young ophthalmologists. And to me, still, external DCR is the best technique, at least in my mind, at this stage of time. Thank you.
Our next, endonasal endoscopic DCR in non-resolving acute dacryocystitis, Dr. Aditi Pujari.
Good afternoon, everybody. I shall be presenting our work on endoscopic endonasal DCR in acute non-resolving dacryocystitis. No financial interest or relationships to disclose. Acute dacryocystitis can be defined as a medical urgency which is clinically characterized by rapid onset of pain, erythema, swelling, classically below the medial campylotine and with or without pre-existing epiphora, mainly resulting from the acute infection of not only the lacrimal sac but also the perisac tissue. It can present as swelling, a combination of swelling and erythema, just the erythema, or it can present as lacrimal abscess, or rarely can present as a case of orbital cellulitis. The standard practice of management of acute dacryocystitis is conservative management with systemic antibiotics, systemic anti-inflammatory agents, and in cases of lacrimal abscess, percutaneous abscess drainage is performed. In another study done at our institute, The median time for resolution of the acute dacryosis cystitis was around 7 days, and 6% of the cases ended in a lacrimal fistula. The most common cause was spontaneous rupture of the lacrimal abscess. The causes of non-resolving acute dacryosis cystitis include progression of the acute dacryosis cystitis to lacrimal sac abscess, virulence of the organism, antibiotic resistance, and persistent inflammation in spite of resolution of the infection. There are few disadvantages of the conservative treatment of acute dacryosis cystitis, which include prolonged or recurrent infection leading to operative cellulitis or life-threatening cavernous sinus thrombosis, adverse antibiotic effects due to their long duration of use, aesthetic side effects like cutaneous scar or fistula, and failure of surgery due to scarring and granulation in sac. So we did a study to evaluate the safety and efficacy of endonasal endoscopy DCR in non-resolving acute dacryosis cystitis. It's a prospective interventional case series where we included the acute dacryosis cystitis cases not resolving completely with systemic antibiotics and few cases which had recurrent acute dacryosis cystitis in acute phase. Completely resolved acute dacryosis cystitis cases without any persistent inflammation were excluded from the study. We did the surgery under general anesthesia. At the beginning of the surgery, we infiltrated the nasal mucosa with a combination of xalocan and adrenaline and packed the nasal mucosa with xalocan-adrenaline combination. You can see the decongestion of the nasal mucosa post packing, which is very important because in these cases the inflammation will be really high. Decongestion will give us the space as well as it will reduce the bleeding. Now the nasal mucosal incision was taken with a sickle knife. Adequate incision needs to be taken to expose adequate amount of bone to do a large osteotomy. This is the nasal mucosa which is being reflected away from the underlying bone. After that, the nasal mucosal flap was cut. Now the osteotomy was started using the endonasal bone punches. It is very important to do the osteotomy very carefully in order to avoid any damage to the sac, because in acute dacryosis cystitis, even the sac will be very friable due to the inflammation. Now the sac incision was taken with the probe in place in the canaliculus so as to avoid any, here you can see the probe which is coming out. This avoids any damage to the canaliculus while taking the sac incision. The full thickness incision is confirmed with the drainage of the pus which was there. Now this is a 45 degrees probe tilt test which confirms that there is nothing in front of the common canaliculus which is going to obstruct. The mitomycin C was then applied, it was 0.02%, and even the circumosteal injection of the mitomycin C was done. Then the sac flap, which was anterior and posterior flaps, were glued or they were kept in place with the autologous serum, which generally comes after the bleeding. Now this is the bicanalular endonasal intubation, which is done by using the proper intubation tube. The intubation was done in all the cases and tube was kept in place for 6 weeks. The routine post-operative care was given in the form of antibiotics, systemic treatment as well as topical treatment. The patients were reviewed on post-operative day 1 week and post-operative 6 weeks. On 6 weeks visit, the tube removal was done and endonasal endoscopic examination of the ostium was done. We defined anatomical success as patency on irrigation and functional success was defined as absence of epiphora. We had 10 eyes of 10 patients, out of which 9 were females, and the age ranged from 8 years to 68 years. The 6 cases were non-resolving acute dacryosis cystitis, whereas 4 cases had recurrent acute dacryosis cystitis. There were no intraoperative or postoperative complications, but one patient had developed granulation tissue near the common canaliculus, which resolved in 6 weeks. All the cases had anatomical success, but 9 cases had functional success. On ostium evaluation after tube removal at the end of the 6 weeks, we observed that the ostium was large. All the ostia were large. They had large base. The most important thing was there was a mucosal contiguity with agar nasal and functional endoscopic dye appearance test. Like on endoscopy, when we put the fluorescent dye in the eye, the dye with each thinking the dye was appearing through the ostium. That showed even the functional success of the case. While seeing the aesthetic results, all the patients had gratifying aesthetic results without formation of any scar or any fistula, which is generally common at the when we have external DCR in acute dacryocystitis. So to conclude, endoscopic DCR has potential use in cases with persistent or suboptimal response after medical treatment, and endoscopic DCR can be a good option in setting of acute dacryocystitis. Thank you.
Thank you. With this, we conclude our session. Concluding remarks from our chairman.
I thank all of you attending here because many things have been discussed. I think we saw new things, relatively new. And as it is a topic which has to be taken to a conclusion, I hope you enjoyed it and maybe it will give you something sharing there. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much. And maybe I think within 2 minutes we will be coming out with the best papers for both. Thank you.